Ladies and gentlemen, we now resume our program and proceed to the first session, Banker's Perspective on the Region. We are now glad to present to you your attention to the moderator of the first session, Ms. Tal Baraf Harif, top editor, Bloomberg LP. Tal Baraf Harif is a top editor at Bloomberg LP and a former reporter on emerging markets.
Hello. Thank you all for joining us here again. We're going to kick off this panel very soon. As mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the future of private banking and wealth management and private equity in Azerbaijan, especially looking at some of the latest events and occurrences in the region. You've heard from some of our panelists as they were the keynote speakers here before, but let me just reintroduce. Joining us today, we have Zubayd Ahmad from Citigroup. Zubayd served as a senior client banker and in the Central Asian region, and also is head of Citi's global practice with the sovereign wealth funds. We also have Faik Mammadov, the chief representative of the International Bank of Azerbaijan in New York office. Faik has represented IBA here in New York for the past 5 years and previously held positions at the IMF and World Bank. Brian Rain, the executive vice president of Bank of New York Mellon. Brian serves as CEO of Broker-Dealer Services and head of banks at the bank. Brian also has previously served on the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's Working Committee. And last but not least, we have Farid Hundov, the chairman of Pasha Bank, who, as said before, joined us today after flying from Baku. So welcome, everyone. How about we just start a little bit with your general view of the Azeri economy and the banking industry. Zubayd, how about you kick us off?
Well, I mean, I will try not to repeat what I said in my opening remarks, but I think, some of the things that hopefully we will get across to the audience is that, the overall health of the Azeri banking sector is quite strong. Obviously, the devaluation in February of this year has had some near-term impacts, but as I mentioned in my comments, that the central bank was ready to inject liquidity in the system. One of the things that the Azeri economy has been trying to get less reliant on is dollarization of the economy, which will probably in the near term increase given the concerns about potential volatility in the exchange rates. But generally speaking, the books have been well matched with some issues. There's going to be, as we discussed, some consolidation in the sector as well, with some of the banks which are not as strong probably being acquired by other banks, which in the long run again will be positive for the sector. The other areas that I think the banking sector is focusing on, and we will touch on it, is really how to get more capital to the small and medium-sized enterprises, because one of the big underpinnings for the diversification of the economy is to really encourage the entrepreneurs to be able to build businesses, and as of right now, they really don't have as much access to capital from the existing banking sector. So I know that a number of the banks who are represented here are focusing on how best to get capital to those small and medium-sized enterprises. And then last but not least, and we will touch on this, especially in the context of SOFAZ, the State Oil Fund of Azerbaijan, which is the sovereign wealth fund with about 50 billion of assets. It has had a fairly conservative investment policy, which has been a good thing over the last decade, primarily in fixed income securities. They have recently started investing in alternative asset classes like real estate. But one of the near-term issues for SOFAZ will be, how to maintain the liquidity given the devaluation and the low oil prices, on not only continuing to fund some of the large government projects, which is what they have done in the past, but really trying to see how they can be a catalyst for attracting international capital. And we have a number of examples of that we will touch on, because clearly, given some of the the macro positives on the Azeri economy, there are lots of investors who would like to invest in Azerbaijan, but really need partners who can help them guide them through the local system. And we think that SOFAS can play an important role in reducing the government's reliance on its funds for funding these projects, but at the same time, bringing in international investors who can be its partners to really provide that growth capital.
Okay. Faye, maybe you want to continue on that?
Thank you. As it's been mentioned in previous sessions, obviously, Azerbaijan is on its growth path for the last quite a few years, mostly attributed to the developments in the oil and gas industry. But we already started seeing the so-called multiplier effect from like big oil and gas investments into other areas of the economy, either related to energy development, energy project developments in Azerbaijan, or separate into either supporting industries or non-oil sector. The growth path has been quite remarkable. GDP doubled, almost doubled in the last 5 years. In 2014 alone, foreign direct investment has reached $11 billion. Again, a lot of it went into the oil and gas, but the non-oil sector is also picking up. And what is also noteworthy to mention is the internal investment is also picking up, and it's coming at a comparable level with FDI levels. It's worth mentioning that 12% of the total foreign direct investment has been originated from the US. So the US is one of the major investors in Azerbaijan. I guess the broader theme for the economy is to sustain, obviously, oil and gas developments with many new projects in the gas developments and transportation coming up in the coming years. But I think another main theme and the challenge for the government and the businesses in Azerbaijan is to develop the non-oil economy to ensure the diversification of the sources of income for the state, as well as the business opportunities in these areas. So that's about it.
Great.
Brian?
So firstly, from a BNY Mellon perspective, we're not new to the region. Much of the business of BNY Mellon is servicing financial institutions globally. About 60% of our revenues come from providing services to financial institutions, insurance companies, and asset managers. In the region, some of the difficulties that have been well handled over the last couple of years, the devaluation as well as the change in the oil price, really represent a change and an opportunity for the economy to reconfigure itself. And the role that we would see for ourselves there would be, to the extent that there's assistance needed with cross-border flows, which we see certainly even the evidence of the amount of people that are interested in Azerbaijan here today, that's something that is likely to grow over time. But also a couple of the other themes that are not just particular to this particular country, but are really global themes, and that is a well-run clearing environment that facilitates the purchase and sale of securities, and where the risk is measurable and capped. Transparency that helps investors, like our previous speaker, the Carlyle Group, to invest in real assets that may not be liquid, like private equity and real estate, and sort of professionalizing the accounting for that in terms of world standard. And then the other would be payments, and bringing to bear the expertise in things like anti-money laundering, in terms of mobile technology, and really just facilitating capital flows into and out of the country. So while there's been 10 years of growth, it would appear that, like most difficulties, there's opportunity that comes out of that as the economy restructures and continues to invest in education, invest in technology, its agribusiness, construction, and then facing the outside world like we are today to talk about inward investment.
Fareed?
Yes, I think we are living in a very interesting time in Azerbaijan these days because the economy seems to be moving to more to knowledge-based economy. That is basically very high on the agenda of the government. We have seen the periods of growth on the back of oil sector development, and it is critical for the government, and there is a high-level realization of this importance, critical for the government to move ahead with agenda whereby public spending, public investment in the country will be replaced by the private sector investment. This is critical. I mean, some may argue that it's give it another 1 or 2 years and the government would have managed, it would have been much better for the country, but that is what we have. So high on the agenda of the government to start creating a right environment for the private investment to take over. I was recently talking to some of the international IFIs operating in Azerbaijan, to EBRD, ADB, and these organizations have been, although we have a situation, post-devaluation situation, there was a crisis which was spurred by a situation in Russia, Ukraine, and despite the seeming sort of problems, regional problems, they're very optimistic on the economy, and they have mentioned that in the for example, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, that in the 23 years of operational history in Azerbaijan, the largest number of private equity deals have coincided with this year. 2015 will be the record year for the bank, for the operation in terms of private equity. I think this tells a lot about the potential. The country has been growing tremendously. There were many successful operations, and now I think is the right time to watch the country and to see opportunities in various sectors. And the sectors have been mentioned already. Agro-processing, manufacturing are very important sectors. We in Azerbaijan, this was a traditional agroeconomy, and as I mentioned earlier, traditionally have been supplying a lot of agro products to neighboring countries. So there is a potential, huge need to import equipment, manufacturing equipment into the country. So there are various ways of coming to Azerbaijan. Investing greenfield is obviously one of the ways. We would very much want and be able to facilitate investments into private equity. I think there are good opportunities, and there will be more opportunities in that. For those who want to develop a taste for Azerbaijani risk, there is already a sovereign risk of Azerbaijan available in the market, the state bank risk available in the market. But for those who want to experience a corporate Azerbaijani risk, I would very much recommend to start watching the best corporates operating in Azerbaijan, just to see. That's probably a nice way of entering the market. This much.
Okay, thank you. I think a lot of the question on people's mind in this audience is, as we've mentioned here, the devaluation of the mana, the slump in oil. I wonder if you can be a little more specific in terms of what can be done right now, what the Azeri economy looks like right now, and what are the opportunities, what are people looking at sort of in the future after all that?
Shall I
Let's
start?
I'll start with you again, if you don't mind.
Well, it's interesting
Our
because
ears and eyes in the ground. So.
macro stability of the country was a key issue. For over 10 years, the government has maintained macro stability also through exchange rate and other macroeconomic sort of tools. After 11 years, there was a devaluation by close to 35%. And we should remember that Azerbaijan in the region was the last in the region to devalue its currency. Psychologically, people in our country have not been used to exchange rate fluctuations. We have been so long living under the stable exchange rate of peg to US dollar regime that I think we are experiencing sort of a shock. This means that the economy will have to adjust to the new reality. Businesses will have to adjust to the new reality, and these behavioral aspects, they are very important. Devaluation, there are lots of questions whether devaluation was needed or not. Our opinion is that yes, the country needed to devalue its currency. There are reasons, obviously, to sustain the macroeconomic stability. You have to have a cushion, and cushion are reserves of the country, and reserves to avoid depletion of reserves, devaluation was needed. From another point of view, basically for the economy that aspires to develop its non-oil sector, you require that competitive edge, stable and strong manner, which has been appreciating over the times, has not been presenting that opportunity for local companies to be competitive exporting their goods outside Azerbaijan. So this positive moment is also there. We believe that this will help exporters. There is a lot for the government to do in terms of developing non-oil sector and developing companies and potential export orientation, export potential of the companies. And as I mentioned, this new sort of economic reality is such that the government will have to move fast, creating the right type of environment for much more players in the economy. So I think this is a positive valuation. Now, in terms of oil price, yes, oil price, the budget of Azerbaijan assumed $90 for an oil price. We now have roughly 60. Next year budget will be $50 a barrel. Azerbaijan will for this oil, the fact that the oil price have been not as high as expected is good, because that will spur the government, that will help the government to move even faster in terms of diversifying away from the non-oil sector. As I mentioned, in the past 5 to 7 years, the government has done a lot, developing regions, developing other sectors of economy, but it takes more time with the heritage that the country had from Soviet times. There is a whole wave of infrastructure development in the country, building roads, building facilities, gasification, electrification of the country. So that has taken a lot of time. Now, I think it will continue, but now the very high priority for the government is to assist and help private sector to take over the public sector in local investment. And here, obviously, the foreign direct investments will also be required. And I think it's right time for the government, and the government has mentioned it, to start creating public-private partnerships, including partnerships with foreign companies.
Okay. Ryan, maybe
Yeah.
you can provide some thoughts.
I would say, given the firm that I'm representing, BNY Mellon, I guess there's two aspects to how we play in the region. So one being the largest custodian in the world, and then secondarily being one of the largest fiduciaries. And I think, as my fellow panelists have said, and as some of the previous speakers have said, there is a marker at this point, and going forward, the economy is likely to be a more diversified economy. And the role that we see is, one, to understand what's happening in the economy, and then two, to be supportive of it. So whether that be hosting people from the region that come and want to learn about, for example, the role of the trustee, which is incredibly important in the case of the sovereign debt issuance, and what is the expectation of international bondholders, or two, whether it be what is the right standard of transparency and accounting with regard to real estate investing. And then I think the other element of it is to support the educational system, whether it be that we're a firm that does a lot in terms of thought leadership on big macro trends, sharing that with the banking industry and the financial industry within the region and within Azerbaijan. And we're also in the unique position of facilitating global trade but not competing locally. And because of that, you really are a partner. And from the perspective of where we sit, this is probably the start of something that's a multi-year, rather than that where we'll do a lot more as some of that thought leadership and investing and training and even speaking at events like this comes to pass, rather than that it's sort of right now in terms of what's happening in the local economy.
Mm-hmm. I'd actually like to take that step forward and talk a little bit about more specific details about diversifying the economy. What do you see? What sort of projects are happening? Maybe we can educate a little more our audience here about some of the opportunities that are happening right now. Faye, maybe you'd like to start.
Yes, I mean, IBA, for example, if we take IBA as an example, has a very diversified portfolio of loans into a variety of industries in Azerbaijan, not only oil and gas, but telecoms, construction, real estate, agriculture, and other spheres of economic activity in Azerbaijan. Obviously, as has been mentioned many times, the non-oil sector is picking up, as well as the going further down the chain into the SME type lending, introducing new sort of lending tools, expanding on leasing, for example, in the country. So basically, historically, Azerbaijan, in addition to oil and gas, has a long history of very sustained agricultural development, supplying the region basically with fruits and vegetables and related products. Related to oil and gas, obviously big potential is in the petrochemical industry, which has also been historically quite developed in Azerbaijan as a part of the former Soviet petrochemical chain or industry. So there are large projects in the pipeline involving both, obviously, the government, like a public investment, as well as the attracting opportunity to attract private investors into in this promising spheres.
Zubeyr, you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the sectors have been touched already. I mean, I would only say, we obviously work with a broad range of countries who are in a similar process of trying to expand their economies. And one of the things that we always emphasize, and I've been using this example quite a bit during the Eurozone crisis as well, that there was a guy named Ricardo in the late 1800s, a Spaniard economist, who came up with a theory of comparative advantage, right? Which was that, a League of Nations compete with each other through some inherent competitive advantages that they have that others don't. And we always have to put that prism on any economy that is trying to diversify, because what we often find is countries are trying to do many of the same things that other countries are doing. And what we say is, do you really think that you can differentiate yourself in that context, right? So clearly, Azerbaijan has a very strong platform, which was its competitive advantage was its natural reserves of oil and now gas. And we are in a transition phase here. I mean, this is not, clearly there's some near-term headwinds, but the country will still grow at a modest growth rate of about 2.5% this year, probably in the range of 2 to 2.5% over the next 2 to 3 years, till Shah Deniz 2 starts producing. And then the expectations are that the growth will come back to 4.5%. Clearly, a lot of the domino effect of a number of these pipeline projects, as well as the production, will have an impact on the construction industries, et cetera. Clearly, one of the first places for the government to start, and they have already started doing it, is taking advantage of that competitive advantage and going downstream with some of the industries, namely the petrochemical project, and that makes sense. I think some of the work that has been done on agribusiness as well as tourism is strong in the sense that there are things that can be done in that area. But I think we are in the early stages, and I think that's where we can be helpful as international investors, having seen this in other countries, aside from what the government is trying to do is, how do we look at this broader market in that region? How can Azerbaijan be used as a place to really create new industries, to be able to produce effectively and comparatively well to export into the regional markets? I use the example in this, by the way, one of the most interesting examples of this is Morocco, that it can be done, right? Morocco started this process about 5-7 years ago, saying we need to diversify the economy, and how should we do it? Well, they looked at, and this is, I mean, Azerbaijan has some similar attributes in terms of where it's located, in terms of this new Silk Road development and what that would mean, but they said, look, we have to take advantage of our location, given where Morocco is located, right? It can be a hub for trade. And so one of the first things that they did was they created a project named Tanger Med, which is a big duty-free zone where companies can come and establish manufacturing plants and really import stuff duty-free and then export it duty-free to other parts of West Africa. So they said, look, use us as a base because we are more developed, we have an educated, skilled work class, to use us as a base to export your products into those markets. And the most fascinating thing with that country is that they decided that they wanted to start with more slightly highly value-added industries. So they said, we think we can build a base of auto manufacturing in Morocco, and we can also do aircraft component parts. And they started on this project. They took their skilled workforce. They created technical training centers. And lo and behold, Renault is now is going to be producing 400,000 cars in Morocco to be not just sold in Morocco, but to be exported to Europe and other parts of Africa. And McDonnell Douglas and some of these companies have manufacturing plants producing aircraft component parts in Morocco. So the point of this is that I think Azerbaijan, given its skilled work base and educated class, a lot of natural advantages, if it puts its mind to trying to see how some of these industries can be developed, it has happened and it can be done. So I think we are in the initial stages of this. And I think there's a lot more work to be done, but the potential is very strong.
If I may, I would like to add basically recently in Azerbaijan, although we are at very initial stage, but there were 3 economic zones, special economic zones established in the country. One of them was in Sumgait, former Soviet times petrochemical center. So that chemical industry, industrial zone is created there, which has special tax regimes, special regimes for the companies that want to establish there. And there are companies who have shown interest, basically French, Italian companies, German companies who will be establishing themselves and directly investing with local partners there. There is another special economic zone that's all around Baku, the capital of the country, which is specializing in IT and telecoms industry, which has also similar regime, granted 7-year exemption from taxes and all other sort of characteristics of such free zones. And the third one is transport and logistics focused free economic zone, special economic zone, and that's located also some 50 kilometers from Baku, on and around territory of Alat, new Baku port. So these are first moves by the government to make sure that there are special zones where investors can work, operate, and enjoy the best favorable regimes for investors. So that's some practical examples of what's being done. I think more will follow.
Yeah. Maybe one point I'd just make, in addition to the 2 panelists' points, would be that we've talked about the educational system, we've talked about the stability of the political system, the fact that it had 10 years of extended growth, and that now it's looking outward more than perhaps it had in the past, partly due to the change in the reliance on oil, but also just due to the time that's in it. But I think one of the things that is likely to come out of a gathering like this is, as private equity and other family offices and investors become more comfortable investing, what is the right legal construct for that investment to take? And you could see with the Carlyle presentation that went earlier that while it's a nascent market right now, that will be the next evolution, which is a US investor, should they invest by going through a private equity firm, the private equity firm would own a fund. Do they go and they buy the asset? Do they partner? And I think at some point that's probably a good discussion, which is really the next natural evolution. And then the second thing that I would say is, Azerbaijan has its own story, but as a firm that sort of has seen developments that have taken place around the world, there's pieces of the story that relate to elements that have taken place in the financial services arena, whether it be in Dubai or whether it's Singapore or others, where there can be knowledge that's gained from that, particularly as it relates to what's the right way to get entice capital to come in a clean fashion, so that both from a taxation and from the perspective of getting gains in and out, that investors feel comfortable with it.
Just to talk a little more about the trends in the banking industry right now in Azerbaijan, maybe our panelists from the local banks can talk a little bit about what you're seeing happening right now, what you're sort of expecting, the evolution of the banking industry. And again, to draw our audience here, what are some of the opportunities for them to partner with the local banks?
Well, I will pick up from the last point. Basically, we have to be realistic in terms of the size of the country and size of the banking sector. So it's a small country. Yes, there are big neighboring Russia, Iran, Kazakhstan, and the rest of the Caucasus. But looking at the country itself, it's a nation of 9 million. And for a bank, for an international bank to operate in that market, I think there is no scale required for international operations. In terms of In terms of partnering with local banks, I think that is a type of approach that international banks could take. Supporting, well, be selective in their approach to the market, select best partners, those who have corporate governance standards, who preach transparency, who preach the right approach and use the best examples of standards, be it in the West or in the East. So that is, I think, what shall happen. In terms of private equity, there are already small private equity firms operating in Azerbaijan, local private equity firms operating in Azerbaijan. They lack skill and resources, but they have ambition to grow operations. So international banks shall be looking closely at partnering with local firms who are on the ground understanding what's happening. When it comes to banking sector is experiencing consolidation. The consolidation effort started some 2 years ago. In fact, central bank, when introduced new capital rules and increased capital fivefold from 10 million manats or US dollars to 50 million. At the time, central bank was not expecting all 40-odd banks in Azerbaijan to manage to raise capital to the level, but it happened. It shows the commitment of banks to operate in Azerbaijan. It creates probably a headache for the central bank, who wanted more actively to move agenda of consolidation. But going forward, we are expecting mergers and acquisitions in the sector. There are already few discussed in the market. We as a bank leading also as advisory, doing investment corporate advisory to some of the clients in that field. That's important to mention because in Azerbaijan, as probably in other newly developing countries, I mean, there is this, not all banks talk to each other. And there is a famous Azeri saying that the heads of two goats cannot get boiled in the same pot. We managed as a bank to have a good relation with all banks operating in Azerbaijan, and we issue and underwrite bonds locally. We lend and very active in international market, and we also lead already first sort of mergers and acquisitions in the sector. I think it's an important trend. It will continue, and there will be more consolidation. The country will require. Although I believe strongly small is beautiful, but unfortunately with all the recent developments in the world, growing the size of the bank and the capitalization of the banks have become a very important issue. And the Central Bank of Azerbaijan, the regulator of the banking sector, understands it and does want more consolidations. I wouldn't say how many banks will remain 3-5 years from now, but there are 44 banks, and everyone's consensus is that there are too many small banks. They have to be stronger to appeal to the economy.
Faik, maybe you can continue to talk about kind of your view on the local bank industry. What do you see happening? If you have anything to add.
Okay. The banking sector actually in Azerbaijan has been sort of a driving force behind many developments in the Azerbaijan economy. Again, if we look at other than oil and gas developments, which were attracting investments almost on their own. But the banking sector has played a catalytic role, basically, in providing needed investments, financing, loans to many sectors of economy in Azerbaijan, supporting trade, international trade. Azerbaijan has a lot of geographic diversity in terms of trading partners with neighboring countries, with Asia, China, European basically countries, and North America, mostly the United States. So the banking sector has been behind this, and we as IBA, for example, have been working very close with export credit agencies around the world, including the US Exim Bank. As for us, IBA pioneered with the first syndicate loan back many years ago. The first bond issue, Euro bond issue last year. Also last year was an inaugural year for launching Islamic finance at a broader scale in Azerbaijan with the first sukuk loan, which also attracted a lot of attention, not only from the Middle East, but from the global players. So that's in short, basically, where we are.
Zubayd, you mentioned some of your ideas about sovereign wealth fund. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how your bank has been involved in some of your ideas also for the industry.
Again, going back to my previous comment, I think one thing we would say is that there is no shortage of capital around the globe looking for new places to invest. Right? There is a massive amount of liquidity in the global financial system. As David mentioned, a lot of it coming from what we call emerging pools of capital, which are the sovereign wealth funds, who are becoming much more of active managers as opposed to passive managers. So their biggest constraint has been, how to find scalable opportunities in new markets, because in existing markets there is a massive amount of competition. And all that's happening is that the return hurdles have been coming lower and lower because there's way too much capital chasing infrastructure assets, real estate assets, et cetera, et cetera. So we start with the premise that if there are good projects, there's plenty of capital, right? Then number one. Number two, in a lot of countries like Azerbaijan or new countries that these investors are going into, they are often very focused on having a local partner because they obviously don't know the local economy, the local ways of doing business, and it's very important for them to have a strong local partner who can provide that partnership to basically navigate through the local economy and also work with them on hopefully making some of the projects that they take on very successful projects. So we have been discussing this concept with a number of countries that have not been able to attract as much capital historically. That if you can figure out a way to, number one, create scalable projects, number two, provide that institutional partnership where people are comfortable with transparency and all the rules of law, et cetera, that you can have significant access to capital to really drive some of the strategic projects that your country has. So as we mentioned, SOFAZ, which is the state oil fund of Azerbaijan, historically, it provides 50% of the revenues to the government every year. Obviously, it gets the oil revenues, and then it allocates 50% of the revenues that the government gets every year from SOFAZ. And they have been funding, historically, as I said, Azerbaijan has been very conservative in its approach to funding. It's been mostly equity finance. They have not raised that much debt, which is a good thing, which we talked about earlier in my presentation. But in this period of the next 2 to 3 years, where the government has significant projects that it's embarking on, not just in the energy sector, but also in the interest of diversifying the economy, one of the things that we have said is, can SOFAZ become that ideal partner of choice to international investors, where instead of 100% funding of the projects through equity, from the reserves of SOFAZ, you bring in international sovereign wealth fund investors who would love to invest in a new country like Azerbaijan for all the things that we talked about, and really reducing the pressure on SOFAZ to fund every single project, but at the same time using this as a tremendous opportunity to expose the country to a new group of international investors who can get comfortable with how to operate in the country and seeing the opportunities. And again, there are two examples of how successfully this has happened. One was, unfortunately, it's hit into some road bumps, but about 4 years ago, President Putin and Medvedev, Prime Minister, basically said, look, Russia is getting bypassed in terms of investing in our country, and one of the reasons is that people are not comfortable with governance and transparency and other things. If we say that we will become your partner, the government itself, and maybe that will help address some of the issues of bureaucracy and other things. And so they created an entity called the Russia Direct Investment Fund, RDIF, which then went out and basically positioned itself as that partner of choice to international investors to come and co-invest in Russia with them. In a period of 18 months, entities like Apollo and TPG from the US, but the sovereign wealth funds of Korea, China, Qatar, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, all committed 10 billion of capital in 18 months to co-invest with RDIF in Russian projects. Again, the most recent example of this is an entity in Morocco. Once they had kind of created this vision of how they want to expand the economy and grow the economy, clearly tourism is one of the strong points of Morocco as well. And they said, look, now we have a program in terms of how we want to implement this. They created a new entity called Wasal Capital to focus on tourism and infrastructure and real estate investing in Morocco, and went out and started talking to a number of investors. And last year, actually it was just formally launched this year, 4 sovereign wealth funds from Qatar, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, and Saudi each put 500 million euros. The local tourism agencies put up 500 million euros, but now they have a $2.5 billion euro fund with these partners to invest in tourism, which will hopefully then drive the rest of the economy. So this is a topic that we have been spending a lot of time on, because clearly one of the ways to expose Azerbaijan to international investors and to let them avail of the opportunities is to find that partner that can bring them into scalable projects and then use that as a basis to expose other things down the road. So hopefully, I mean, that's again an evolving process. There's some charter things that need to change. But I think that could be a very good opportunity to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as we say, in terms of not only dealing with some of the near-term funding for large projects, but also bringing in international investors at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add in terms of how your bank has been involved in some of the projects that you see happening in the region, in Azerbaijan right now?
I mean, I think I'll just briefly recount. I think it's best practices, training, sharing. I think it's facilitating both inward investment. So, we service institutions from around the world that are interested in what is the best avenue or venue for investing into Azerbaijan. And then we also have our own investment management arm that independently makes decisions, including that region of the world. So really, it's really a case of making sure we ourselves stay current with what's happening, and then as the bank-to-banks help those institutions that either want to get investment dollars or euros or whatever the currency is into Azerbaijan, or ultimately it will be the other way also, where Azerbaijan will be a net capital provider to businesses around the world. And maybe that's several years out, but the beginnings of that, I think, is starting to be seen.
Okay, thank you. We're kind of reaching the end here. Before I open the floor for some questions from the audience, I'm going to give our panelists a bit of a challenge here, if you don't mind. Covering these emerging market conferences for many years, I think one of the hardest things is kind of to take the main idea from some of these discussions. So I'm going to ask each of you in just a few words, kind of summarize your views, that you want people to take with them when they leave this room. Kind of what's the main idea, what's the main thing they should think about, the main takeaway about the opportunity of investing in Azerbaijan. And Zubayd, you're smiling, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, look, I think, again, not to repeat myself, I think there is a significant opportunity to look at Azerbaijan as a platform to tap into the other local markets. Because I think one of the key things that was mentioned before is the size of the local market In order to attract international investors, you have to create a vision that you can take advantage of all the good things that Azerbaijan has to offer in terms of the skilled workforce, in terms of the developed economy, some of the strong domestic political stability, and then really use that as a platform to expand your product growth in some of the regional markets. And I think some of the regional transportation infrastructure that is being built to connect some of these economies that have been really not as connected, it really creates an interesting opportunity right now for international investors to look at Azerbaijan from that perspective.
Okay. Faye?
Yeah, I mean, Azerbaijan historically has been at a crossroad of major geopolitical and economic interest, and it remains to be so. Although, as I mentioned before, it's a relatively small economy and population-wise as well. But these challenges also create opportunities, and Azerbaijan has a very diverse geography. Although it's a small country, different climate zones exist in Azerbaijan. It is a very tolerant country, and it has a very motivated and educated labor force. So all this provides, I think, in addition to the vast natural resources, provides an opportunity going forward, which we look forward to.
Brian?
I would take away from the conference that obviously something different is happening. You have a good group of people in the room, and you have a chamber of commerce supported by the major financial institutions in the country that are sort of taking time to come and explain the market. So maybe I'm seeing it at an earlier stage, but I think this represents an important point in time that this conference is taking place.
I think we celebrated Memorial Day yesterday here, as I understand, and I would like to mention a few historical facts. Azerbaijan was a country that supplied 80% of oil, petroleum, for the Soviet army for fighting in the World War II. And Azerbaijan has lost over 400,000 people in the World War II. Every fifth man was fighting in the war. But I mention it because Azerbaijan was one of, amongst Soviet republics, it was one of five republics, countries that were self-sufficient and were net donors to the economy. So for years, we have been supporting the Soviet Union as a country, and it's only 22 years of independence that the country has got. The country has potential, there are ambitions. Obviously, geopolitically, it's an interesting place where the country is located. A delicate balancing act between powers, regional powers, is something which is hard to achieve, but Azerbaijan has achieved its first, its sovereignty, independence. It has managed to manage throughout this period for the interest, long-term interest of its nation to have the macroeconomic stability. It has cushion and reserves, and it has, when you compare where we were 20 years back, where we are today, and when we try to extrapolate another 20 years ahead, it's a future regional leader. And I think the country is open. The transparency and governance levels are are expected to increase over the period, and I think everyone shall watch the country as a potential, as a country with huge potential, and as a country where to invest. So that's, I think, what I would recommend to take away from here. And I would like to thank again the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for having this event, and I very much hope this will be a very regular event whereby we can exchange views and provide more information on what's going on in the country. I also hope to invite many of you to Baku to see with your own eyes what's happening there. Thank you.
Thanks. So now if there are any questions in the audience, please, you can just raise your hand, and I think we can pass a microphone. Any questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a lunch break at this time. The lunch is being served at the North Middle Room in the 3rd floor. It's out the door at the back of the theater, and you'll take the elevator to the 3rd floor. Thank you.